New York City nearly died between 1975 and 1981. The greatest metropolis in America teetered on bankruptcy's edge. While crime exploded, fires consumed entire neighborhoods, and hundreds of thousands fled to safer ground. These years transformed the city into a battleground where survival meant more than just making rent. "The Bronx is burning" became a national catchphrase after ABC cameras captured flames engulfing buildings during the 1977 World Series at Yankee Stadium. Howard Cosell's commentary over images of fire became the defining moment that told America how far New York had fallen. Landlords torched their own properties to collect insurance money rather than pay taxes on worthless real estate. Fire companies responded to dozens of calls per night in neighborhoods where entire blocks had been abandoned to arson and neglect. Firefighters worked under impossible conditions, battling blazes with outdated equipment while facing rocks and bottles thrown by hostile crowds. Charlotte Street epitomized the destruction, where President Jimmy Carter walked through ruins in 1977 and promised federal assistance that arrived too slowly and too sparingly. Buildings lost to fire stood like broken teeth along avenues where children once played, their empty windows staring at passers-by who hurried through these dead zones. The South Bronx lost 600,000 residents during the 70s, leaving behind a landscape that resembled bombed European cities after World War II. Gangs claimed territory in the ruins, while city officials debated whether to rebuild or simply bulldoze everything and start over from scratch. David Berkowitz terrorized the city for 13 months, shooting 13 people and killing 6 with a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver. Young women changed their appearance, cutting long brown hair short and dyeing it blonde to avoid matching his preferred victims. Couples stopped parking in quiet spots, and discotheques in Queens emptied as fear replaced the nightlife that had defined New York youth culture. His rambling letters to newspaper columnist Jimmy Breslin turned the hunt into a macabre media spectacle that gripped the entire nation's attention. His capture in August 1977 didn't end the paranoia he'd unleashed across the 5 boroughs. The tabloids had turned him into something larger than one disturbed postal worker, a symbol of lurking evil in every dark corner. Neighborhoods already stressed by economic collapse and rising crime now carried the weight of knowing a random killer had selected victims for nothing more than sitting in parked cars. The city that never slept now jumped at shadows. Parents kept teenage daughters home at night, and the simple act of going out after dark became an act of defiance against fear itself. President Gerald Ford's refusal to rescue New York created the infamous Daily News headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead." The municipal government owed $14 billion to creditors who'd stopped buying city bonds months earlier. Mayor Abraham Beame slashed 65,000 jobs from city payroll, gutted essential services, and watched helplessly as garbage piled on sidewalks for weeks. Police officers, firefighters, and teachers faced layoffs while their unions scrambled to prevent complete collapse. The city that had built the Empire State Building and welcomed millions of immigrants now couldn't pay its own employees or collect its trash. The Financial Control Board seized power from elected officials, appointing unelected overseers to manage every dollar the city spent. Banks and bondholders dictated policy, while democratically elected representatives watched from the sidelines. Subway cars covered in graffiti broke down constantly, leaving commuters stranded in sweltering tunnels. Libraries closed branches, parks turned into overgrown wastelands, and streetlights went dark to save electricity costs. Citizens learned that their government couldn't protect them anymore, couldn't pick up trash, couldn't keep trains running on time. The social contract between city and residents had been torn apart by fiscal mismanagement and national indifference. Riding the subway became an exercise in calculated risk, as crime on trains jumped 40% between 1975 and 1980. Passengers learned to avoid empty cars, clutch bags tightly, and never make eye contact with anyone who looked threatening. Graffiti covered every surface, transforming trains into moving canvases that transit authority cleaning crews couldn't control despite spending millions on removal. Writers like Tacky, 183, and Dondi made their tags famous, but most passengers saw only vandalism and disorder spreading like a virus through the system. The trains themselves fell apart from deferred maintenance, catching fire, losing doors, and stranding riders deep underground. Platforms reeked of urine and burnt electrical wiring, while homeless people established encampments in abandoned stations. Broken lights created pools of darkness where muggers waited for victims. Middle-class New Yorkers who could afford alternatives abandoned mass transit entirely, taking cabs or moving to car-dependent suburbs. The subway became a mirror of municipal failure, a steel and concrete reminder that the city couldn't perform its most basic functions. Rush hour meant packed cars where pickpockets worked, crowds with practiced efficiency. 42nd Street transformed into America's sex industry capital, lined with peep shows, adult theaters, and prostitutes working every corner. The Deuce, as locals called it, operated under different rules than the rest of Manhattan, a place where pimps, drug dealers, and runaways mixed with businessmen seeking illicit thrills. Neon signs advertised XXX features, while hustlers sold everything from fake watches to genuine violence. Three-card Monte dealers worked their cons on cardboard boxes, while lookouts watched for cops who rarely bothered patrolling anymore. This wasn't the glamorous Broadway of earlier decades, but a cautionary tale about what happens when authorities surrender territory to criminal enterprises. The Port Authority bus terminal dumped thousands of young arrivals directly into this predatory ecosystem, where survival often meant compromise. Teenage runaways disappeared into the machinery of exploitation within hours of stepping off buses from small-town America. Yet even here, amid the degradation and danger, New York's strange vitality persisted. Artists found cheap studios nearby, punk clubs opened in the shadows, and a weird creative energy fed off the decay. July 13, 1977 brought 25 hours of absolute darkness after lightning struck power stations in Westchester County. Within minutes, looters smashed windows across Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Harlem, hauling away everything from television sets to entire racks of clothing. Police arrested over 3,000 people that night, but thousands more ransacked stores with impunity while officers stood outnumbered on burning streets. Entire families participated in the looting, parents loading stolen goods into cars while children grabbed what they could carry from shattered storefronts. The blackout revealed how fragile civilization had become in neighborhoods abandoned by investment and opportunity. Bushwick looked like a war zone by morning, with entire commercial strips reduced to smoking shells. Store owners who'd spent lifetimes building businesses watched everything vanish in hours of unchecked rage. The contrast with the peaceful 1965 blackout couldn't have been starker, showing how much trust had eroded between communities and institutions. Fire departments battled over 1,000 blazes simultaneously, while the darkness concealed acts of violence and destruction that would haunt the city for years afterward. CBGB on the Bowery became ground zero for a musical revolution that rejected corporate rock's bloat and pretension. The Ramones, Television, Blondie, and Talking Heads played to tiny crowds in a former biker bar that smelled of stale beer and neglect. Patti Smith brought poetry to punk, transforming the stage into a space for artistic expression that matched the raw energy of New York streets. Punk's stripped-down sound and DIY ethos perfectly matched the city's collapse, turning poverty and danger into aesthetic choices rather than failures. These bands transformed New York's decay into cultural currency, wearing torn clothes and celebrating urban grit, while mainstream America fled to suburbs and shopping malls. The music was fast, loud, and aggressive, mirroring life on streets where survival required constant alertness. Club owners like Hilly Kristal provided spaces where young artists could experiment without commercial pressures, creating scenes that would influence global culture for decades. The energy born in these grimy venues proved that creativity thrives in chaos. Musicians slept on floors, ate cheap food, and played for almost nothing, but they were building something that would outlast the crisis surrounding them. While neighborhoods burned, Steve Rubel and Ian Schrager's nightclub offered the wealthy and famous an otherworldly refuge from urban collapse. Studio 54's door policy became legendary for its cruel selectivity, with crowds begging bouncers for admission to a space where celebrities danced until dawn under twinkling lights. Inside, cocaine flowed freely, inhibitions dissolved, and the outside world's problems ceased to exist for the chosen few. Andy Warhol, Liza Minnelli, and Mick Jagger became regular fixtures in a temple dedicated to excess and escapism. The club represented both escape and denial, a glittering bubble floating above the city's suffering. Bianca Jagger rode a white horse across the dance floor, while sanitation workers picketed over layoffs outside. The contrast between Studio's excesses and New York's deprivation created resentment, but also fed the city's mythology as a place where anything could happen. The party ended when federal agents arrested Rubel and Schrager for tax evasion in 1979, proving that even fantasy palaces couldn't escape reality forever. The club's closure felt like the end of an era, the moment when pretending everything was fine became impossible. Curtis Sliwa organized 13 volunteers to patrol subway trains in February 1979, wearing red berets and guardian angels jackets to provide the protection that overwhelmed police couldn't deliver. The group grew to 1,000 members within 2 years, expanding from trains to streets across high-crime neighborhoods. Politicians and police officials initially condemned them as vigilantes, but desperate citizens welcomed their presence on platforms where muggers operated with near impunity. The Angels walked through subway cars in groups, their red berets sending a message that someone still cared about public safety. The Angels represented citizen frustration with institutional failure, ordinary people taking extraordinary risks because government had abandoned its core responsibilities. Their presence sparked debate about whether private security forces should replace public safety, whether citizens should police themselves when the state withdraws. Yet in those dangerous years, their red berets offered visible reassurance on trains where help otherwise never came. They embodied New York's resilience, the refusal to accept decline as destiny. Members came from the same tough neighborhoods they patrolled, understanding the streets in ways that police from outside precincts never could. "How am I doing?" became Mayor Ed Koch's signature greeting after his 1978 election victory over Mario Cuomo. The brash former congressman brought confrontational energy to City Hall, picking fights with critics and demanding that Washington send more federal aid. Koch's personality matched New York's combative spirit, refusing to apologize for the city's rough edges while working to stabilize finances and restore basic services. He walked neighborhoods, argued with hecklers, and projected confidence when confidence seemed insane given the circumstances surrounding him. His administration benefited from improving national economics after 1980, but Koch sold New Yorkers on themselves again, reminding residents why they'd chosen to stay when millions fled. He cut deals, strong-armed unions, courted Wall Street, and projected confidence when pessimism still dominated headlines. The city that emerged from the crisis years bore his stamp tougher, more skeptical, less willing to accept failure. Koch proved that leadership mattered, that attitude could shift momentum even in seemingly hopeless situations. He became the embodiment of New York's refusal to surrender, the voice that said the city would survive because New Yorkers were too stubborn to let it die. Mountains of trash piled 10 feet high on sidewalks during strikes that turned New York into an open-air dump. Sanitation workers walked off the job multiple times between 1975 and 1981, protesting layoffs and wage freezes imposed by the bankrupt city government. Rats emerged in daylight, feasting on rotting food while residents held handkerchiefs over their faces against the overwhelming stench. Garbage bags split open, spilling contents across streets where children played and people tried to conduct normal lives. The strikes revealed how quickly civilization crumbles without basic services most people never think about until they disappear. Businesses closed because customers refused to navigate obstacle courses of refuse blocking entrances and fouling the air. Health officials warned about disease outbreaks while politicians and union leaders negotiated in air-conditioned offices far from the filth consuming working-class neighborhoods. When collection finally resumed, trucks worked around the clock for weeks, hauling away evidence of how fragile urban life had become. The sight and smell of those garbage mountains became burned into memory, a visceral reminder of the city's dysfunction. Heroin flooded into neighborhoods already devastated by unemployment and abandonment, creating an addiction crisis that destroyed families and fueled violent crime. The drug trade operated openly on certain corners, with dealers and users conducting business in broad daylight, while police struggled with reduced forces and limited resources. Needle parks in the East Village and Spanish Harlem became dead zones where addicts gathered, visible symbols of a society unable to help its most vulnerable members. Emergency rooms filled with overdose victims, while treatment programs turned away thousands for lack of funding and beds. Children stepped over unconscious addicts in building stairwells, becoming desensitized to human suffering before reaching adolescence. The heroin epidemic wasn't separate from the city's other crises, but intertwined with them, another symptom of institutional collapse and social breakdown. Families watched loved ones disappear into addiction's grip, knowing that help wasn't coming, that survival meant getting through each day in a city that had stopped caring whether its residents lived or died. What was the heroin epidemic? New York survived by becoming something different, shedding its mid-century prosperity and idealism for a harder, grittier identity. The years between 1975 and 1981 killed the old city, but birthed the modern metropolis more dangerous but more dynamic, more divided but more diverse, stripped of illusions about government protection or guaranteed prosperity. Those who stayed through the fires, blackouts, and bankruptcies earned the right to call themselves New Yorkers, having proven they could endure anything. Subscribe to discover more untold stories from history's most defining moments.